Well, hello everyone. It's been a long time since I've made a video. My name is Isaiah. I am not a historian. I'm sorry I haven't made any videos in the past several months, but school started a couple months ago, and that means homework and distance learning and classroom meetings, and I've been really busy with that, so I'm sorry. But here you go, some more content for you to feast your eyes on. So last time we left off at the height of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union and the United States were facing off in ever-escalating conflicts in the fields of science and politics and diplomacy and technology. Today we're gonna see the Cold War brought to a climax and then fall sharply as the Soviet Union falls. We begin today in 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, previously in the 1950s, a US-backed dictator by the name of Fulgencio Batista ruled the island of Cuba. However, a coup led by a certain Fidel Castro overthrew him and proclaimed communism on the island. Now, about the same time, the Soviet Union, spying US missiles set up in Turkey, asked Castro if he would politely let them set up their nuclear missiles in Cuba. And Castro said, "Why, yes, of course. Go ahead, my friend." And so the Soviets promptly smuggled in missiles and set up missile bases on Cuba. Now, in early November, an American U-2 spy plane was flying over Cuba, snapping reconnaissance pictures. Then it saw the Soviet missiles, these Soviet nuclear missiles capable of hitting any point in America in a matter of minutes. The pilot hurried back to American soil, and an analyst reported this news to the president, John F. Kennedy, who promptly freaked out, along with the rest of America. Kennedy and his advisors decided to enforce a naval blockade over Cuba, and this is not an act of war, this is an act of quarantine, as Kennedy put it. Now, a few days later, a squadron of US ships spotted a Soviet submarine that was hiding in the depths. And that submarine was carrying a nuclear torpedo. To force it to surface, the US destroyers started bombarding it with grenades. And when the grenades didn't work, they used practice depth charges. And it was at this point that the fate of the world hung on a knife's edge. A very thin knife's edge. No, normally on a nuclear Soviet submarine, 2 officers had to approve the launch of a nuclear torpedo before the torpedo was to be launched. The captain and the political officer. In this case, both of them voted yes. However, on this particular submarine, there was a 3rd officer. Just by random chance, there was a 3rd officer, the flotilla commander, Vasily Arkhipov. And he voted no. He convinced the captain and the political officer to surface and show themselves and receive orders from Moscow, which they promptly did. And Vasily Arkhipov will forever be known as the man who saved the world. Because if the Soviets were to fire that nuclear torpedo, the Americans would surely retaliate, and the world would be vaporized in an all-out nuclear war. Now, while all this drama was happening, the United States was busy organizing an invasion into Cuba to remove all Soviet influence from the island once and for all. And the day before the invasion happened, the day before, mind you, the Soviets offered a deal. They proposed a missiles for missiles trade. The Soviets would remove the missiles from Cuba, and the United States would move their missiles from their ally Turkey, which was quite near the Soviet Union, just as Cuba is close to the United States. The Americans promptly accepted, and war was averted. And so the Soviets pulled out of Cuba, and the Americans pulled out of Cuban waters, and everybody lived happily ever after, except Castro, who was really angry at the Soviets for not doing more to stop the Americans. Now, right after this, everyone agreed that, you know what, this nuclear war thing doesn't seem to be the best idea. Yeah, 3 years back, there was that mess with Cuba that, no, we don't want that again. And so the Soviet Union, the United States, and the United Kingdom signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the first nuclear treaty in history. Now at this point, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev had been replaced by Vladimir Putin. Oh wait, no, he wasn't? Really? It wasn't Putin? Come on, whenever I want it to be Putin, it's never Putin. Come on. Alright, fine, so Leonid Brezhnev became the new leader of the Soviet Union. Look at those eyebrows. Anyway, alright, and then this happened, right, the Vietnam War. So, much like Korea, the former French colony of Vietnam was divided among a communist north and a capitalist south. Now, the Soviet Union, under both Khrushchev and Brezhnev, had supported the communist north, and they constantly sent supplies to their communist friends. However, they never sent direct military aid. Now, both the North and the South wanted to reunite Vietnam under their own banners. And, they kind of went to war with it. So in 1965, a group of North Vietnamese torpedo boats allegedly opened fire on an American ship in what became known as the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And the Americans used this as a pretense to enter the war on the side of the South Vietnamese. Now, both sides already had troops raised from earlier stages of the war, but when the Americans started sending soldiers in, this is where the war really started amping up. American bombers carpet bombed North Vietnam in what became known as Operation Rolling Thunder. And the Vietnamese and the Americans made regular incursions into each other's territory, the most famous of which was the Tet Offensive, launched by the North Vietnamese on the Lunar New Year known as Tet. Now, this war was especially frustrating for the Americans because the Vietnamese would use the jungle as a hideout and ambush the Americans in a guerrilla war while they were trudging through unfamiliar territory. And, to make things worse, a North Vietnamese soldier was apparently easy to mistake with a regular Vietnamese civilian. When an American soldier had to tell the difference between the two, they often fired on the wrong one. As a result of these factors, the atrocities and the constant defeats, the American public turned against the war, and the United States pulled troops out of Vietnam. And 2 years later, in 1975, South Vietnam fell. Oh, and also in 1965, the Soviet Union launched the first woman into space, Valentina Tereshkova, aboard Vostok 6. So, yay, that happened. Now, in the 1970s, the Soviet Union and the United States signed the SALT treaties, the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaties, a huge step forward in reducing both countries' nuclear arsenals. Now, there was something called the Soviet-Afghan War that lasted a decade between 1979 and 1989. Now, Afghanistan at the time was ruled by two political parties, both of which were communist and Soviet-aligned, that had recently come to power, and they liked ruling Afghanistan very much. The people did not like them ruling Afghanistan as much, and some of them rose up in sort of armed militias called the Mujahideen. Clashes between the Mujahideen and the two communist political parties started happening all over the place. The Soviets, annoyed that the communists were not gaining much progress, invaded. Now, President Jimmy Carter of the United States was all for the Mujahideen. He provided support to them, and he even boycotted the Olympics. Anyway, so the Soviet invasion quickly ground down to isolated units fighting and holding strategic positions, and the Mujahideen constantly ambushing the Soviets and harassing them. Eventually, the Soviets had to pull back, and things basically returned to the status quo. So, not much accomplished. And then Leonid Brezhnev died and was replaced by Yuri Andropov, who died and was replaced by Konstantin Chernenko, who died and was replaced by Vladimir Putin, except he didn't. He got replaced by Mikhail Gorbachev, who was all reforms. He encouraged more freedom among the populace to express their thoughts about government and the world and, just life in general. This is a huge leap forward and hastened the end of the Soviet Union. And as a result of this, Gorbachev became very good friends with US President Ronald Reagan. And then this happened. The Chernobyl disaster happened when the Chernobyl nuclear plant in Chernobyl in the Soviet Union exploded due to an overheating contraption. This spread nuclear radiation all over Europe and really lowered Soviet prestige on the global stage. Not long after, the Eastern Bloc, the part of Eastern Europe that the Soviet Union controlled, started breaking away as they started having elections one by one and violent revolutions, as was the case in Romania and Yugoslavia. And things were really cooling down. It all culminated with the fall of the Berlin Wall. Now, the Berlin Wall had stood since 1961 as a reminder of the separation of families. It was a reminder of grief. Loved ones were torn apart by the wall as East Berliners couldn't enter West Berlin and West Berliners couldn't enter East Berlin. It was just really a stark reminder of the ongoing conflict that was happening. Now, on November 9th, 1989, an East German official by the name of Günter Schabowski announced that borders are going to be opened. And a reporter asked when, and Schabowski flipped through his notes, and he wasn't really clear on when, and he was like, I don't know, tonight maybe? Well, guess what? Everyone in East Berlin and West Berlin thought it really was that night. And so they flooded the gates. They demanded that they be let in, and the border guards really had no choice, because how could they shoot down so many people? And so they let them through. And as more people came, they came with sledgehammers, and they used them to smash down the Berlin Wall. They tore down the wall. They tore down the cold division that separated them from their loved ones. And they proceeded to party all night. They partied all night in the streets and celebrated their newfound freedom. This was basically the end of the Cold War. By 1991, the Soviet Union had completely disintegrated into what we know as the countries of Russia, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan today. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss on any of my new videos. And leave a comment. What did I leave out? What should I talk about in the future? I am not a historian, so I must have gotten some things wrong. And feel free to criticize me for anything that I did say wrong, and I'll see you next time.